My name is Isabella, and I'm a 28-year-old working mother. My husband Richard is a company employee, 2 years my senior, and we're about to celebrate our first anniversary. We met at a party I was invited by a colleague. Amidst many assertive people, Richard stood out as calm and kind, and despite being older, he had this adorable quality. The way he talked was different from other men who seemed rather sleazy, which put me off. In contrast, Richard would say things like, "My family is really close," or "That embroidery on your dress is cute. My mom loves stuff like this." His conversations were heartwarming, and he was the easiest person to open up to. At that party, I only exchanged contact details with Richard, and soon after, we started seeing each other and naturally progressed to dating. Before marriage, Richard lived with his parents. I've been living alone since I went to college, away from my parents. Living at home, Richard didn't have to pay rent, so despite being around the same age, his disposable income was much higher than mine. Richard loves to travel with his family and friends. We traveled together sometimes, but I couldn't afford it as much, so it was only on rare occasions. After marrying, we started living together in an apartment. It was Richard's first time living away from his parents. He seemed excited and happy about our new life, so I didn't sense any problems until he said, "This weekend, I'm inviting Mom and Dad over. Actually, from now on, they'll come over every weekend." What? Richard began inviting his parents over every weekend. Their house was just a short drive away. Occasional visits would have been fine, but frequent visits were a bit much. I thought they visited just recently. I asked casually, trying not to upset him. "Yeah, isn't it great? Their family, after all." He didn't get the hint at all. Every weekend, I felt utterly helpless, dreading their visits. The issue with my in-laws coming over was the repetitive talk. "Richard is such a remarkable son. The pride of the family, ha 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 ha." Hearing the same conversation every time was one of the challenges. My in-laws often come over on Friday nights and stay until late on Sundays, spending all their time chatting in the living room. I can't just leave, so I end up having to be part of these interactions. Since they are guests, I'm the one who has to host. On my precious days off, I'm expected to cook lavish meals, clean the house, and even take care of their personal needs, leaving me exhausted. It would be nice if my husband and in-laws appreciated my efforts, but instead they complain about my cooking. "Isabella, your cooking is somehow lacking. The drinks don't go down well with this." "Richard, are you eating properly? You look thinner." "It's okay, Mom, Dad. I often eat out during the week." All three of them criticize my cooking. I had noticed before we got married that Richard's family tends to have heavily seasoned food. During our dating period, when I cooked for him, I was surprised to see him dousing steaks and scrambled eggs with loads of sauce. I started worrying if my cooking was too bland, but I realized it was just Richard's taste, as he did the same even in restaurants. Still, it's frustrating to hear from my in-laws. "Isabella, you need to cook properly. Didn't you taste it? Is this how it's supposed to be? A wife who can't cook is no good. You need to improve, or it might lead to divorce." It's irritating to be told that my food isn't delicious. Your seasoning is too strong, or maybe your taste buds are off. I can't just say, "I'll be more careful next time." All I can say is, so I started making the food saltier and providing extra sauces when they visit, which I don't normally do. I can't risk my husband developing high blood pressure. "Oh, today's meal is a bit better, I guess." It has improved a bit, just a bit. Their appraisal slightly improved. But when I tasted it, it was quite salty, and I thought to myself, what a family of tasteless eaters. Well, if they are satisfied with that, I suppose it's okay for now. However, things got even worse. One weekday, when I returned home tired from work, I found my mother-in-law, Emma, there. "I'm here to teach you how to cook." It was past 9 p.m. I have to get up early tomorrow, I thought, but my silent plea was ignored as Emma's cooking lesson began. Her cooking was, as I expected, laden with seasonings to an unhealthy extent. The soup was loaded with condiments, and the main dish was fatty meat with extremely heavy seasoning. It whets your appetite, doesn't it? Emma seemed delighted. Richard dug in like a boy, exclaiming, "This is it!" The difference in our food values was terrifying, and I reluctantly tasted a bit of the meal. After that, Emma began visiting our home frequently. On weekends, my father-in-law, Joseph, would also stay over. It was almost like living together. It was exhausting. I reached my limit trying to accommodate my in-laws and desperately wanted at least 2 days off a week without seeing them. So, I subtly suggested to my husband, "How about we go somewhere to relax?" He loves traveling, and I thought he would take it as a hint for a trip. As expected, he said, "Great idea, let's plan a trip." He began planning the trip. Since moving in together, we had been in an almost co-living situation with his parents, but this would be our first trip alone since our honeymoon. Richard hadn't been traveling with his friends either. I hoped he was saving for our future. The trip he planned was a weekend getaway for 2 nights and 3 days. The destination wasn't far, so we could relax without taking leave. "Thank you," I said, grateful to my husband for planning it. "Yeah, leave the trip planning to me," he said proudly. In hindsight, that was a mistake. On the day of the trip, while waiting for the bus to our destination, Richard was looking around restlessly. "What's wrong?" I asked, but I realized the reason before he could answer. "Oh, good, we made it in time." "Hey, Richard, sorry to keep you waiting." To my surprise, my in-laws had shown up. I looked at my husband apprehensively. "Come on, both of you, we're almost late for departure. That was close." "That was close? No, this is not what was planned. I want my enjoyment back." "What do you mean? When I mentioned the trip, Mom and Dad thought it would be more fun if we all went together," my husband said with a smile. I wish he had at least consulted me, or better yet, stopped discussing everything with his parents. He's already 30, for goodness sake. "Come on, let's get on the bus." "Isabella, don't just stand there daydreaming." "Okay." I wished for my 3-day holiday back. Throughout the trip, the enthusiasm of my husband and in-laws was overwhelming. "Let's have lunch at that restaurant." "Let's go to that place for drinks tonight." All the places I wanted to visit were ignored. Richard kept catering to his parents, paying no attention to my preferences. The worst part was, "Wow, what a great room, Richard." It was a 4-person room. I had been looking forward to staying in a suite, but it was a different room. Unable to sleep due to their snoring, it was an utterly exhausting trip. Back at work after the trip, I let out a big sigh, and my colleague next to me looked at me in surprise. "Hey, what's wrong? You've got serious dark circles." "Really?" I checked in a hand mirror and saw severe dark circles, not just blue but almost like red blemishes. I hadn't noticed them in my rush to leave the house. Lately, I've been so tired that I haven't spent much time on makeup. I was shocked. Then, my colleague whispered in my ear, "This is hard to say, but Isabella, your hair..." She pointed to a spot on my head. "What?" Afraid of what I might find, we went to the restroom together. Using the restroom mirror and my hand mirror, I checked the spot she pointed out and found a bald patch, the size of a coin. No way. I felt all my strength leave my body. A friend of mine had the same issue. "Are you stressed? Doesn't your husband notice?" My colleague helped arrange my hair to cover the bald spot, but I was truly shocked and didn't know what to do. Since it wasn't very busy that day, I left work early due to feeling unwell and stopped by the dermatologist before going home. I received medication, but it wasn't something that would heal quickly. The doctor said the cause wasn't clear-cut. However, I had already made up my mind. When my husband Richard came home, I brought up the subject. About the next trip we're planning. Richard seemed really excited about the last trip and was already planning the next one. He says, it's just the two of us, but I'm sure his parents will end up coming again. So, I tried a different approach. Can we take my parents along? If I said I didn't want to go, the trip would be cancelled, and his parents would probably end up staying at our house again. If I said I wanted to go out, his parents would join us. Yet, Richard hardly spends any time with my parents. He's only met them at the marriage introduction and the wedding. I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to understand how difficult it is to spend time with in-laws. But his next words left me speechless. No, I don't want to. It's tiring and I need to be considerate. What? He makes me put up with his parents all the time and now he says it's tiring? I was completely infuriated. Later, my husband, I, and his parents, as expected, went on another trip. What place is this, I wonder? Wasn't it expensive, Richard? Are you sure it's okay? His parents seemed excited about the new destination, which was a bit further away than usual. Well, this time Isabella planned it, so I'm not too sure. Richard replied to Joseph. Yes, I planned this trip. The accommodations, the restaurants, everything was booked by me. Isabella, it's important to have fun, but don't spend too much, okay? Yeah, a wife needs to be frugal. Upon learning that I arranged everything, his parents started implying that I was careless with money. It's okay, I got a good deal through an acquaintance. Oh, I hope it's not too old or anything. And not a place with bland food. That would ruin the trip. I'm a bit worried about Isabella's choices. Ignoring their unhelpful comments, I led the way to our accommodation. It was getting dark, perfect timing for dinner. We planned to have our meal at the hotel. Upon arriving, Richard and his parents were astonished. Is this really the place? It was a splendid upscale hotel. Yes, let's go in. I entered the lobby nonchalantly and completed the check-in. The room had a beautiful view of the sea, which would be even more apparent in the morning. I had arranged for the meals to be brought to our room. They were quite lavish courses. As the meal began, my in-laws were initially speechless. Once the hotel staff who had arranged and explained the dishes left, they started reacting in the complete opposite way. Places like this look good, but that's about it. It's expensive, but the taste might be mediocre. They began eating, complaining all the while, seemingly unable to graciously accept that I had arranged a stay at such a nice hotel. Then the comments started. Oh, this is bland. Is there any seasoning? See, it's all just for show. Maybe Isabella's arrangement wasn't such a good idea. All three, my in-laws and Richard, began complaining about the food. I found it delicious, but what could I do with three people whose taste was off? Sitting near the room's entrance, I discreetly summoned the hotel staff without them noticing. I let the staff listen to their gripes and demands for a while. This lack of taste in the food reminds me of Isabella's cooking. Did we come all this way just to eat Isabella's cooking? I was hoping for something delicious on this trip. They effortlessly mixed complaints about the hotel and me, freely voicing their opinions without any prompt from me. This hotel looks old. It must be cheap because it's big. Is this how our son's wife treats us? Choosing a cheap place for us to stay? Don't worry, Dad, Mom. Next time I'll handle the arrangements. They kept eating and complaining. Then, excuse me, a voice from outside the door said. Emma, thinking it was the next course being served, cheerfully replied, Yes, but it wasn't about the food. I understand there have been some dissatisfaction with our hotel. The man who appeared wasn't carrying any dishes. It was a man not holding anything. Oh, Richard uttered, freezing up. The man continued. I also heard there were complaints about my daughter. Yes, the man who appeared was my father. Oh, Emma looked confused and turned to Joseph. "Well, what a coincidence to meet here! Ha ha ha!" Joseph laughed nervously, but my father's expression remained stern. "If there's anything you're unsatisfied with, we can remake it or change to a different menu. May I ask what it would be?" My father calmly questioned them. The three, having pretty much finished their meals, seemed unable to respond. "No, nothing in particular," Richard replied. "Is that so? Earlier, my daughter asked me to listen to your requests, as you are important guests. So I was waiting outside. I apologize if our hotel's cuisine, which is relatively lightly seasoned, did not meet your preferences." When the three realized that my father had heard everything, their expressions changed to shock. "It's a joke. The food was actually very delicious. Just kidding around, you know. Ha ha ha. Seeing Richard's forced laughter, my father said, "There's no need to strain yourself." Richard's face froze at this. I had called my father to discuss the stress caused by my in-laws, leading to my alopecia and the lack of support from Richard. It was the first time I consulted him about my husband. My mother passed away early, and I didn't want to worry my father too much. Hearing my story, my father was furious. "I'm coming over right now." He was determined to travel despite the distance from our house to his. I told him about Richard's travel plans and the likelihood of the in-laws joining, so we devised this plan together. My father is a retired manager of a prestigious hotel and still has influence there. As a child, I was often left at this hotel. Because of his late working hours and my kindergarten schedule, the hotel was my caretaker. I was doted on by the staff, helped with cleaning, learned cooking, and enjoyed delicious meals. So, my cooking skills are honed by this hotel. And I'm confident they are not as bad as my husband and in-laws complain. If this hotel doesn't suit you, please leave. If you are a burden to my daughter, I'll cut off ties," my father said sternly to Richard and my in-laws. "How can you say that? Tell a guest to leave?" My in-laws were furious, but another staff member came in and cleared their plates. They were stunned by this. "Please leave," my father urged them, and they reluctantly exited the hotel. "Is this a joke? We'll get our money back, right?" They complained, but the money won't be refunded, as I was the one who paid. Watching my in-laws leave, the hotel employees looked at them with disdain. They must have been really uncomfortable. The in-laws' complaints quickly ceased. For once, the usual 3-on-1 criticism against me was reversed, and I felt a sense of relief. After that incident, my husband, not wanting to face me, went back to his parents' house. I compiled all the mistreatment I had endured and consulted a lawyer. After getting an estimate for alimony, I sent the documents to my husband by mail. Startled, he hurried back home, pleading with a near-tearful face, "Divorce and alimony? That's too harsh." But when I asked, "Do you have a solution then?" he stuttered, unable to answer. It was clear he would never prioritize me over his parents. "If you want to fight this thoroughly, I can call my lawyer," I warned. He quickly agreed to the divorce. My ex-husband returned to his parents' house, but it turned out he didn't have much money. I had thought his frequent travels before marriage meant he was well off, maybe saving money by living at home, but he was just a spendthrift. Living at home, he managed even if he spent his whole salary. After marriage, when we started sharing rent, his inability to afford travels became apparent. Now, with the alimony on top, travel seems out of reach for a while. Neither my ex-husband nor his parents are likely to travel anytime soon. The hotel my father chased them from is a very famous one, well known for its cuisine, and often featured in the media, which my ex-in-laws were unaware of. The inn of my ex-daughter-in-law's father is terrible. The food is awful. And so on, they kept saying at family gatherings, apparently embarrassing themselves. "Isn't that the wonderful hotel? Oh, your family, right? Tasteless, aren't they? How's your blood pressure? Better be careful." they were told. I heard this from a close relative. Though I divorced in my 20s, my alopecia has healed, and I'm living happily and healthily. I cook and eat what I like, feeling much better physically. This year taught me that forcing myself to adapt is harmful. While it's natural not to share all values, I've learned to avoid marrying someone imposing and overbearing again.